Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Constructive Criticism. I'm your host, Spencer, and I'm joined by my co-host, a silver pro who we are late because he and I won't shut up about standard, Michael Hinderrocker.
How's it going?
Hey, so want to see something really funny?
Sure.
Okay, are you ready for your mind to be blown?
Yes.
There is a little latch that attaches to the cord of this microphone so that it sits behind your head nice and neat. And yeah, we didn't realize that, when we used them for like 3 months before.
Wait, it does what? What does it actually do?
It hooks up to the back of the headset so that the cord isn't dangling in your face.
Oh man, that sounds so much better. Oh well. Live and learn. Or live and don't learn, whatever.
So for those watching
Down
the
for
video
anything.
those watching the video podcast, that's great. For those listening, it's like we use these microphones for months, and like the cord that attaches to the audio interface would like dangle in front of our mics and like hit it, and like was just in this awkward place. There's actually a clip in the back that I discovered, and we're just stupid. It's fine. It's fine. You know who's not stupid, though, is our sponsor. You can check them out at Oasis Games. You can get 15% off of your first order by using the code CCMTG at checkout. And you can get 4% off every order by using the code Would That Be Good? No spaces in that. But Oasis is an amazing place to buy Magic the Gathering cards. I just sold my collection to them last week. They were giving amazing prices on cards, so don't forget to check out their buy list. It is just quite the place. Check them out at Oasis Games. You can also check out our other sponsor at the Mana Base. I've been having deep discussions about our sponsorship with them. We're very happy with it. So check them out. Check out their sponsor at Fusion Gaming. You can buy all of your Steel product there. It is an amazing place. One of the top stores in Canada. They sponsored Canadian Nationals. Check them out at the Mana Base. You can check out Nigachu, the Mason Slayer, as well as other content providers. We really appreciate our sponsorship there. Let them know that we sent you, and check out their sponsor at Fusion Gaming as well. You can also support this network. What is happening? Mason's all up in chat now. You can check out our network by supporting, Limited Time Only, a podcast about getting better at limited Magic, as well as this podcast. And then I think Kyle is still looking for a new co-host of Common Knowledge, a popper podcast about getting better at Magic the Gathering. So don't forget to check that out. And if you're interested in that job, please get a hold of Kyle and myself, and we can maybe set up an interview for that. And you can check out Heezy Game Media on YouTube. So that's the entire network right now. And we really appreciate everybody that supports it and the YouTube channel and everything like that. You can support all of that content directly by going to patreon.com/ccmtg. Become a patron of this show and all of our shows. We have 3 new patrons this week. We have Chris P., David S., and Paul D. Paul is actually a returning patron. He had some financial situations, and he's excited to be back. He sent me some very heartfelt messages about how much he loves our content and how he was sorry to have left. And I was like, dude, don't apologize to me for leaving when you have stuff. We keep this podcast free, and it means the world to me that Paul thought enough to come back and become a patron again. But never ever apologize if you have other things going on in your life. The reason that we do this podcast for free is to help people improve at Magic the Gathering. But we really do appreciate you, Paul. We appreciate you, David, and we appreciate you, Chris.
Absolutely.
Michael's silent today. It's the silent assassin, Michael Hinderrocker.
I feel like if I break this up, we might, break the 3-hour barrier.
There's no way that's true. Dude4552 wants to know what Spencer's favorite anime is. It's Yu Yu Hakusho. Fun fact. Let's go on to our first segment. So we have no Patreon questions this week, but if you are a patron of the show, every month I post a thread that allows you to participate in the show by asking a question, starting at $1 more per month. Anything you see fit, you definitely get that. Go to patreon.com/ccmtg, become a patron, and you too can ask a question for the show. Hashtag Always Improving is the first segment today. And we're going to be talking. The reason we talk about this every week is because we have a strong belief in trying to improve all the time. It's not just about getting better and reaching your goals. Because you reach your goals, you have new goals, maybe. And if you don't keep things up, then it's going to be harder and harder to achieve those goals because Magic's really tough. When you don't play for a while, you fall far behind. And honestly, the game's so hard that there's no way that you're the best player in the world, that you're perfect, and you can always be improving. So, Michael, speaking of not being the best player in the world, what have you done to improve at Magic the Gathering this week?
I mean, that feels both harsh and not harsh at the same time. Just been trying to figure out kind of what direction I want to go with this Pro Tour. There are a bunch of decks that are pretty reasonable, and it's just tricky to nail it down sometimes and just be like, I think this is what I want to play.
It's really funny when you have so many reasonable deck choices, usually nothing feels reasonable. Like when everything is good, it also means that everything is not that great.
It means that nothing is broken, right? There's no like, oh, you just have to play this or you're wrong. And I think there are like 3 or 4 decks you could pretty justifiably play. Plus, I mean, maybe some, secret stuff you still got hiding somewhere. So
yeah,
it's just like, tricky.
It's funny because I feel like as a team, basically since, I mean, we've just discovered the best deck. I mean, since I don't even know. Pro Tour Origins we definitely didn't because that was my Pro Tour, and I played Green Red Devotion, and the best deck was like big mono red. But like outside of that Pro Tour, I feel like we've done a really good job. Like, whether it's Aetherworks Marvel, mono red, Mardu, we've done a good job at finding the deck for a Pro Tour, and I don't know that there is a deck for this Pro Tour.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to say that going in, like, Team Energy is a pretty heavy favorite, but just it's not oppressive, right? I mean, it's like very much just a mid-range deck of guys and stuff. It's not doing anything fundamentally unfair. It's just playing a bunch of like pretty good creatures, and there are ways to go over the top of it. Probably ways to get under it sometimes. It has weaknesses. The mirror is also pretty miserable, which is my biggest strike against it, probably. But it's definitely a little bit more of an open format, I would say, than some that we've seen in the past.
When you think about I don't know that our team has had success on the Pro Tour, right? Like, the group, like, I feel like all of us can qualify for a Pro Tour, and as a group, like, we do a pretty good job of finding a good deck for the Pro Tour. Do you find the fact that we find good decks reassuring as a group, or does it make you a little nervous that even though we're finding good decks, that we're not, turning that into chains? Like, how does that make you feel as the person going to the Pro Tour?
I think that the good thing about this Pro Tour fundamentally is that as long as you have a plan, it is very unlikely that the deck you play is going to be a pile. So ultimately, I like that kind of a setup because I've had so much better luck at like a GP at a Grand Prix level than a Pro Tour level, and I think that when it comes to actually like metagaming and making the smaller calls in deck building, I'm pretty comfortable with that. Whereas sometimes trying to kind of feel out, what other people like. It's a lot easier if I can say, well, I think about 20% of the field is going to play Team Energy, and that's just almost certainly true. Like if I was off by more than 5% in either direction, I would be shocked.
Sure. Yeah, I think that having this Pro Tour be this way, it is definitely one that I wish that I was qualified for, because I think that having a plan. It was funny, this week on the Game Podcast, I almost just stole his exact quote, made it the topic this week, but I want to wait a couple weeks and kind of flesh out my actual feelings on it. But Brian Gottlieb said that having a bad plan is better than having no plan at all when it comes to Magic the Gathering when you go to these kind of events. Because even if you're wrong, at least you know what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I say that I've actually said this a lot recently, but I usually put this in the context of having a plan that ends up being incorrect is better than having the perfect deck list and not knowing what your plan is.
Yes,
that, like,
I agree.
If you have a game plan you're trying to execute and you have a sideboarding strategy and you know what the games look like in pre and post board games, even if even if your deck ends up being like worse than you think it is, you're going to win a certain amount of matches through just like sound role assignment, good mulliganing, good sequencing, and just understanding of how the games are going to play. Where if your deck is great, at any sort of premier level event, the players are mostly good enough to punish you for making missteps, even if your deck list is slightly better than theirs.
So, for me this week, I have a problem sometimes in Magic the Gathering to get on this brewing mindset. And so, this week on Wednesday, I played a Grixis deck just to play a Grixis deck, right? To see if I'm smarter than the pros who, spend their time at Worlds trying to make a good control deck. And too often I run into this problem where I do this, and while I thought that the deck was probably just as good as blue-black, I'm really trying not to force things anymore. This week I played just straight up stock list that I got off the internet for Teamer. I played a stock Mardu list that I got off the internet. I played a stock mono red deck that I got off the internet. And I think that doing that more often will be good for me, because I need to understand more often what somebody else is trying to do when they're putting a deck of cards together, and not, well, this person's just wrong, and then do my own thing. And I preach that a lot on the podcast, but I actually don't do it that often. So it was kind of reassuring for me this week to kind of understand, what are people playing? What are they doing? Why are they doing it this way? And it did lead me to a different deck, right? So my current deck list that I'm currently playing is not stock, but I have a better understanding of what those people are trying to do. And that's a good feeling.
Yeah, I think ultimately just starting with the mindset that people who've done well are probably smart and probably have their reasons for doing things.
Yes.
And just, if you test something and it's bad, okay, why is it bad? Why did they think it would be good? And I mean, if they won a big event or something, even more than why did they think it would be good, why was it good for this event?
Right.
Right. And I think just trying to figure out not just what, but why in general, just trying to be more reflective and introspective as a deck builder is a beneficial thing, certainly.
Yeah. Speaking of which, let's go to our Deck Doctor segment when we're talking about deck building. So every week on the show, we invite patrons of $5 or more to participate in a Deck Doctor segment, which we'll read off their deck list, talk about the things that we love, the things that we would change, and where we think the deck stands today. Michael, as our designated Deck Doctor reader, why don't you go ahead and read this out for us?
A true talent. 4 Aether Hub, 4 Drowned Catacombs, 4 Fetid Pools, 5 Island and 6 Swamp. So we are playing 23 lands, 4 Minister of Inquiries, 4 Gifted Aetherborn, 4 Champion of Wits, 3 Torrential Gearhulk, 2 Noxious Gearhulk, 1 Razaketh the Foul-Blooded, then 3 Fatal Push, 3 Glimmer of Genius, 2 Vraska's Contempt, 2 Walk the Plank, 4 Chart a Course, 2 Search for Azcanta, and 3 Liliana Death's Majesty.
So this deck was all over the place last season, before the rotation, literally everywhere. And I lost to this deck more than every other deck last year.
Yeah, they were playing Ever Afters, right? But kind of the same.
Yeah.
But just kind of a value deck where the Lilianas get to bring back some crazy stuff.
I'm actually super interested in your thoughts on this. So I have a few things that I want to ask before we get into what we love and what we would change. So what do 2 Search for Azcantas, 4 Chart a Course, and 4 Champion of Wits equal to you in the number of lands that you should be playing?
I think that I'm okay with about 23, 24 in a deck like this, mostly because I think that the searches are going to act like lands when you need them to, given your Minister Champion.
Yeah.
I think that they're going to be flipping relatively quickly most often.
Yeah, I think so too. I
might play 24 though. 23 might just be ever so slightly too slim.
It's funny because I'm usually super conservative on the lands. I would rather be flooded every time than mana screwed, and I I think that 23 might be right in this deck.
It might be. It's certainly close. Like
It's really close.
the Charter courses are pretty reasonable. You have just enough attackers to like draw cards when you need it, but you can also use them to loot.
And you want to use them to loot a lot in this deck.
Right. It's not necessarily a downside, but I think that you're going to frequently be able to turn on the raid part of that spell as well. In general, I like some of the ideas here. I was actually just talking with Spencer about how much I like Gifted Aetherborn right now, and I really like it. I was talking about it in tandem with the Scarab God, but I really like it in any deck where we're kind of trying to reanimate things, just because it is both a pretty good reanimation target occasionally, but it also it ends up playing a lot like a removal spell. It really helps get you into the later game.
Yeah, I really like where this deck is coming from in this format. It's really exploiting kind of a problem with removal. Like, once you get to the point in the game where you can be putting these things into play with your Lilianas, like, they can't kill them usually, especially after you get value out of them with things like Torrential Gearhulk and Noxious Gearhulk. One thing that I would say, though, is I'm kind of surprised at the lack of Scarab Gods in this list.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a budget consideration or what, but I am almost certain that you want at least 2, maybe even 3 Scarab Gods.
Yeah, I would definitely cut one of the Torrential Gearhulks. And then I'm
probably
not
cut the Razaketh.
Okay. I think that could be true too. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's the change that I would make. But I do like where this deck is coming from, and I think that it exploits problems with the format. And you could easily make a good sideboard for things like Mono Red and Mardu in this deck. And I'm really not worried about the control variants, and I think that you would have a pretty decent Teamer matchup. Except for sideboard, I would worry a little bit about Teamer once they get into the optimal version of their deck.
Yeah, I think this looks pretty reasonable. The Lilianas are pretty powerful. I think the Torrential Gearhulks may be a little underwhelming, just in that you don't really have that much to flash back with them. So I would agree that maybe looking at trimming some of that. And the Razaketh, I think, is a nice thought, but I think Scarab God ends up being so much more powerful. And Scarab God's particular synergy with Gifted Aetherborn is really, really nice as well. Being able to bring that back as a 4/4 Death Touch lifelink is really, really powerful.
Especially since you want to be trading it off anyway.
Right, exactly. And it gives you targets in your opponent's graveyard as well. So I'd been really happy with the synergy between those 2 cards.
Yeah, so I would say focus your sideboard a little bit on aggro once you start building that. I have been more impressed with Vraska's Contempt than I thought I would be. But yeah, I think that putting some Scarab Gods in this and then building your sideboard accordingly for the rough matchups. And I definitely would encourage you to play Duress also. I think Duress is at an all-time high right now, and it's something that you should definitely be trying to get into your sideboard right now.
I agree with that for sure.
Cool. Well, let's go on to our power rankings. So every week on the show, we want to talk about a specific constructed format. This is constructed criticism, and we like to criticize decks in constructed. And this week, we are doing Legacy. We're actually going to be really quick on Legacy because it is, I think, almost the identical top 5 to our last top 5. So we're pulling results from MTGO Goldfish, which includes the 5-0s and the Legacy Challenge. And there's a real problem in Legacy right now. I think that there are last time I looked, there were 251 people inside of the Legacy leagues. And that is tiny compared to Standard and Modern, and I mean it's half the size of Standard and Modern, and it's
Modern's usually about double that.
Yeah, it's bad, guys. Like there are not Legacy is very affordable in MTGO, and people are not playing it. So let's talk really quick about the decks, though. I think they're literally the same 5 decks, but let's come in at number 5 we have Julian's deck. Julian is an Elves master. He's constantly doing well with the deck. And let's talk about this really quick. So my producer has told me to make sure to state that there are in fact 61 cards in this deck, but I want to talk about how 2 of them are Nissa Vital Force.
Yeah, he's been playing with that one for a while and having pretty good success with it. The main things that are different, like here versus the completely stock list, are the Nissa Vital Forces, and he's sort of popularized them enough that people are just stealing his list. Like most of the 5-0s are just actually his exact list. But for some period of time,
I was going to say that there's another person who literally has his exact list that 5-0'd
I'd
twice.
say the vast majority of them are his exact list. But it looks like, so basically he's playing 2 Nissa Vital Forces. He's playing less natural orders, and he's playing a main deck crop rotation. And I think that the main idea is to go a little bit more in on being sort of a grindy value deck in a lot of these matchups, rather than like a full-on sort of
I actually really like 2 natural orders and 1 crop rotation. I think that's a really nice split when you're thinking about like kind of how you want to win games. I also I honestly I played a lot of Elves. I think this deck is beautiful. I would not actually change a single card in this. Like if I was going to play this deck tomorrow, I might play this exact 75.
The Nissas are good. And I think that a lot of these choices are sort of with an eye towards the 4-color Leovold matchup. But the Nissas especially seem almost impossible for that deck to beat.
Yeah, Trav wants us to talk about standards since the PT's next week and he's qualified when the PT is in fact not next week. You might want to adjust your plane ticket, Travis. So anyway, I think
I feel like that. Yeah, perhaps the bigger problem with standard right now is that you're probably getting people holding stuff back a little bit.
Yeah, also that. So where do you think that the Elves stands right now in Legacy?
It's in an interesting spot. I think your Grixis Delver and Leovold matchups are pretty good, but your Sneak and Show and all your combo matchups really are pretty miserable. So you are sort of in this weird spot where people have picked different ways to try to prey on the Leovold deck, be that via, basically combo decks seem to do better than trying to line up fair decks against the Leovold deck. And then you're in this sort of weird cycle where Elves is better against Delver and Death and Taxes than Sneak and Show and Ant are. But Ant and Sneak and Show both are very good against Elves. So you have this sort of weird circle where a lot of people are gunning for 4-color Leovold and have different ways of doing it, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, people are trying very different things, and those things prey on each other, so it can be a little bit rougher.
But it makes for some pretty interesting decks showing up, and I think it's generally is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to the next deck really quick. The next deck that we have on the list is in fact Ad Nauseam, a deck that you already mentioned. This is Ad Nauseam Storm. They are converging closer and closer on kind of what we talked about last time. Dark Petition has become back into the format completely. Most of the list playing, some of them. What do you think about this deck right now?
Yeah, this one is interesting. I am a little bit surprised, just given the amount of Deathrite Shamans, that this still seems to be the preferred version relative to the Rite of Flame Burning Wish lists. Because this deck in general mostly has to kill with Past in Flames and is pretty soft to Deathrite Shaman, whereas the Burning Wish version is not. Oddly, this deck... So this is sort of... basically, these decks were named at a time when they were more different. So despite the fact that the Epic Storm is actually the much better Ad Nauseam deck, this one is named Ad Nauseam Tendrils, so it's kind of like the whole Big 10, Big 12 situation, if you're familiar. sometimes things just get named and then it's just what they're called. So this deck is actually a Past in Flames.
You know what's even better than that, by the way? The Big 12 has rights to the name the Big 14 and the Big 16.
They were smart and saw that coming. So what you're saying is the Big 10 is going to have to go to an odd number of teams to solve their problems. Perfect.
Didn't they have an odd number when they were the Big 10? They had 11 teams before.
I don't know. I thought they were at like 10, and then they went to 12, and then the 12 went to 10, and the whole thing was kind of a gigantic branding nightmare. But that's sort of what this reminds me of.
They went to the Big 10, and they changed their logo so that it was actually an 11. Anyway, that's great.
That's great. So I think this deck is pretty reasonable in a bunch of matchups. I think your Grixis Delver matchup, not great. Your 4-color Leovold matchup, pretty good. People are finally playing more Hymn to Torox as opposed to counter spells.
Can I just say that Xanthid Swarm I've always hated in Storm?
Yeah, I think they are mostly out of favor these days. There are way less like pure blue control decks. The card that you're really playing against a lot is Hymn to Torox.
Right.
So I wouldn't be. I kind of like.
I like Duress and Spell Pierce.
Yeah, Duress or Flusterstorm. Flusterstorm's kind of an interesting one. A lot of the lists from European players have leaned more that way recently.
The problem they have with maxing out on Flusterstorms, though, is that there are games in which, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter. It's just a Spell Pierce a lot of the time anyway. I guess that's fine.
Yeah, usually they don't bring it in against the prison decks, but they do bring it in the mirror and against like Hymn decks.
Right, exactly.
So
cool.
it fills a little bit of a different role, but sort of the same idea.
Well, neither of us are top 8 competitors. We do know one with this next deck, and that's Sneak and Show.
Yeah, Danny, a true Sneak and Show master.
Yeah. The man, the myth, the legend, Danny Cathro, who popularized the incorrect number of certain lands in his deck.
Oh yeah, I vaguely remember that. What, did he have like only one City of Traders because his roommate couldn't buy an extra one or something terrible like that?
Yeah.
But yeah, this deck is. There are a lot of. I'm honestly surprised this deck is doing well. There are a lot of Hymn to Torox, and that feels like the card you really don't want to play against. Leovold is also kind of annoying. But
yeah.
Metagame share is up, and it looks like it's been doing pretty well.
It sticks up the Legacy Challenge, and I actually really like the list that we have on our screen right now. Like, the numbers all make a lot of sense to me. I appreciate...
The ley lines seem great.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to talk about. And then this sideboard seems sweet. What do you specifically like, Layla?
Well, JPA is really good player. He has just a ridiculous amount of 5-0s and is like a Sneak and Show player at heart. But I think the ley lines are really good. The Blood Moons are pretty good right now. I like Defense Grid. And I just generally feel like his deck is constructed. It's so lean. Like, you look at the main deck and like the Omnisciences can be a little clunky, I'm sure. But like 2 Spell Pierce, 2 Flusterstorm, it's not that easy to hymn you. This deck doesn't care about Deathrite Shaman. This deck kind of cares about Leovold, but like not if you can see it coming. I mean, it's bad against him. It's bad against him, but he knows it's bad against him.
It's bad against Leovold. Let's be really honest about that. But I do think that he has I think that he has an identity of what he's trying to do. I think he's bad against Leovold. I think there's not really a way of getting around that.
Gristlebrand is bad against Leovold. Emrakul is perfectly happy to see your opponent put a Leovold into play, right? I mean,
right, but like if you don't have show and tell, like if you're trying to dig for your combo, then you're deck is bad against Leovold.
Sure. Yeah, I mean it's bad against Resolved Leovold, but I mean I think that like any combo deck is bad against Resolved 3-mana permanents. You can mostly pick one.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair point.
I think if your opponent is getting to that part of the game and you haven't assembled your stuff yet, your hand wasn't really getting there.
Let's talk about a deck that crushes this deck, though, and that's Grixis Delver. Something that from Eternal Weekend, there was Rug Delver decks doing well, by the way. But I do want to talk really quick about just the rise in all the things that Michael and I have been saying this deck should be doing literally forever. So if you look at the deck list on your screen, they've got True Names, they've got Young Pyromancers, they've got Gurmag Anglers. They are not the 4/4 Stifles. Michael, we've been saying that this is how this deck should be played for literally a year.
Yeah, I think the True Names make a lot of sense, and like going away from the Young Pyro package just a little bit. It looks like Ator92 has, I don't know if that's the list we have up, but he's playing like the list that I traditionally attribute to Lewis CBR, but like playing more True Names and then like having the Spell Pierce in the main deck, so you have access to Cabal Therapies in the boarded games, but you're not like super in on it in game one.
Exactly.
And I think that against like Leovold decks playing a bunch of hymns and stuff like that, you're kind of better off playing hard to deal with single cards rather than trying to assemble these sort of like mini combos.
Especially cards like Gurmag Angler too. Like if there's anything, because I play a lot of 4-color Leovold, and like, well, you can in fact kill that card eventually, but it takes like a Toxic Deluge to like get rid of it.
Yeah,
or you clear
gotta,
their
like,
board
Jace
and like, or like Diabolic Edict with the Jason play to bounce their other thing. It's just awkward.
Yeah, it's a hard card to get rid of, and I think that Gurmag, or True Name rather, kind of falls into the same category. And I think that the move away from like the full suite of Young Pyromancers just sort of shows where Grixis Delver's at these days and what your number one nemesis is. I mean, the flip side is that the 4-color, and the reason that this deck is competitive with 4-color Leovold is that the 4-color Leovold mana base is not very good. So just kind of the whole like days
which is the reason that Stifle is in this deck again, right? Because they weren't playing it, and now they get to play it because it preys on the best deck.
Yeah, and I think that like Stifle's also pretty good against Storm, and even against Sneak and Show, it can be okay just because they like really need to shuffle after Brainstorm, or they need whatever. Like Stifle is always castable, and I think that in general, Cabal Therapy probably has higher upside in that this deck isn't really quite like Rug Delver, where you can just like consistently mana screw your opponent and just end the game real quick. But it has a way higher floor than Cabal Therapy, where when Cabal Therapy is bad, it's like really bad.
Right. Awesome. Well, let's go on to the number one deck, but this deck is spicy.
Which list do we have up?
I'm sure that we have the Clash list up.
Well, that's not 4-color Leovold.
Oh, is it not?
This is just a different deck.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a deck called Thieves. So this is like a Dak Faden Punishing Fire deck.
Oh, they have them all listed as this.
Yeah, but this isn't. It's just not the same deck.
Oh, so are there? Okay. So I went through the list and I picked this one because it was spicy. I did not realize that people were calling this something else.
No, it's like its own archetype. Yeah.
Is it? It's like the same deck. The only difference is that you're playing more Planeswalkers and you're not playing the cheap removal.
You're playing Dak Faden and Notion Thief. It's like very much its own deck. I mean, it's like Grixis, so you play a lot of the same spells, but Dak Faden is.
So, but you're saying because you're not like a hymn deck, you're not the same deck? That makes sense to me.
I mean, they're playing Punishing Fire and Grove and Dak Faden and Notion Thief. Like, Notion Thief, Dak Faden is sort of the combo, if you will.
Already Mom Spaghetti wants to know who's getting fired, and it's probably me, as I'm the one that picked this deck list because I thought it looked sweet.
I mean, so it is cool. I'm not gonna like the Thieves deck is really cool. It's also just not good.
Well, here's my thought. So two things before we. So I don't know what percentage of the metagame on this is taken up by this Thieves deck.
Not much. It's mostly clashed and like one other guy playing it.
Yeah, I do think that the Baleful Strix. Man, is this not just an evolution of this deck? Like they're playing the same spells. They're just playing Punishing.
Deck.
I've never seen this before. You know how much Legacy? I play Legacy every week. I've literally never seen this.
Yeah, it's an old deck.
Where have you seen this before?
I mean, there's like a separate thread. I can find it, but it's like I'm pretty sure is
Okay.
I gotta
Well,
find it.
let's talk about four color Leovold and ignore the deck on the screen then. So the obvious things here are Kolaghan's Command and Hymn to Turok are kind of the linchpins of this deck. You have Baleful Strix, Deathrite Shaman, probably some Snapcaster Mages. You have a split between Fatal Push and Lightning Bolt. And then you're kind of low on lands. But this is a combination of Grixis and Bug. Like straight up, it is likely that your deck is specifically trying to exploit Deathrite Shaman and Leovold, Jace the Mind Sculptor and Planeswalkers, and kind of just ignoring the Shardless Bug aspects, kind of removing the Shardless Bug aspects and filling that with red cards.
Yeah, so basically, I just posted the link to the other thing in the Twitch chat for anyone who's interested. But basically, what you end up looking at is like a lot of Snapcaster Mages, and then I think Andre Strosky was playing 2 Jace Vryn's Prodigy in his main deck at Eternal Weekend, so a bunch of people were trying that out.
Yeah, I saw that card has gone up in value.
Yeah, but that has not been typical. That's sort of a new idea. But just like these decks have really moved towards Hymn to Turok as like the primary disruptive spell over Counterspell, like they were playing a few months ago. And especially with Snapcaster Mage, it's just really oppressive. Yeah. This deck is so good at generating value, and it gives you some play in the combo matchups, and you get into these slugfests in the mid-range matchups, and just having like Hymn to Turok on turn 2 is really, really powerful.
So I talked about, I'm glad you brought that up. I kind of talked about that over GP Vegas weekend, how I was really unhappy with the counterspell in my deck, and I just wished that it was another Hymn to Turok. And I think that's because your mana base is already so bad that trying to split those cards is basically impossible.
Yeah, I think trying to split them just doesn't happen, and I think that one of the main things that Hymn does is like Hymn plus Leovold just puts your opponent, if you can actually curve those into each other, it just puts your opponent in a lot of unrecoverable situations where like normally you might be able to sort of like sandbag a land and brainstorm out of it or whatever, but if you actually go down a bunch of cards and then have to like fight with a Force of Will or something, you just don't have any cards left in your hand and none of your draw spells do anything. You can't win.
Yep. So that I think is a snapshot at Legacy for you guys. The format hasn't changed too much, other than apparently this Thieves deck that I thought was just some sweet new tech.
But it's really cool. Like, if you're looking for something fun to play, that deck is really fun.
Sure. But yeah, that's a snapshot into Legacy. We didn't want to go too deep just because we just talked about these exact same 5 decks 3 weeks ago. So let's instead do a deck of the week. This is something that we talked about doing that we really enjoy doing, and that's kind of going in depth on a specific deck in a format. So this week we're going to do Ramunap Red. The list that we're going to have on our screen is from Deep Finesse. And honestly, Michael, I think we both played this deck a little bit here. I assume you played it for the Pro Tour. I played it a little bit. And I kind of want to just why don't you give us a simple summary of what this deck is trying to do at this moment in the metagame?
Well, I think this deck is like maybe a little more mid-rangey than it was the last time around. But you just have like a lot of really efficient creatures with good abilities that are hard to interact with. People are playing some Harsh Mentors now between the main and the side, rampaging Ferocidons between the main and the side, and you just have like a lot of creatures that are difficult to deal with as sort of a critical mass, but are also individually relatively powerful, backed up with really cheap spells, and all of this makes both Hazoret and Bomat Courier kind of insane.
Yeah, one of the things that I would say in a simple summary for this deck is it's the you don't get to block deck. One of the things that is really key to beating this deck is having efficient removal spells. And the reason for that is because the more that you play to the board, the more that you're playing to this deck's advantage. Too often you play to the board and then they get to play out other creatures while you can't block, and then they resolve a Hazoret. And you become in big trouble because you don't get to block, and then they have a Hazoret in play, and suddenly you just shouldn't be blocking, or your blocking doesn't matter. And that's a real problem. So to beat this deck, you really want to be playing efficient removal spells that get rid of the cards.
Yeah, you have to play efficient removal spells. It's nice to have a way to gain life, and it's nice if you do have blockers for them to like either have some kind of an ability that can sort of ignore. So like something like either like Pia Nalar style, Heart of Kiran style, or Walking Ballista style. And these work kind of in 3 different ways, but those are sort of the 3 that I would highlight. So like Pia Nalar splits into multiple bodies, right? So it's hard to make everything not able to block. Heart of
Whirler
Kiran
Virtuoso did the same thing for a long time.
Right, exactly. But just throwing out ways that you can sort of circumvent this. Heart of Kiran, they have to attack first, so all of those abilities happen before you would have to crew Heart of Kiran. And then Walking Ballista just obviously can serve as a removal spell even if it's unable to block. So there are a lot of cards that are good against mono red, but ultimately the card Hazoret is just very challenging to deal with, and the deck is really efficient, and then you will frequently get pinged by the lands in the late game.
Yeah, I think that, calling it Ramunap Red, people were so confused, like, there's so many Ramunap Ruins decks, but, like, they all converge into this eventually, and honestly, Ramunap Ruins is a huge part of the deck. Sunscorched Desert doesn't look that great on its surface, but when you combine it with Ramunap Ruins, it just turns them into lightning bolts that you're throwing at your opponent's face, which really closes the game out quickly because they don't get a block in the early game. So it's very easy for you to say, well, now that you don't get a block, I'm going to sit here and block your things while I sit there and fling lands at you. And it's also the reason that it plays 24 lands, which seems really high for an aggro deck, but it works out for him.
Well, it works doubly, right, in that your Hazorets are very weak when they can't attack the turn you play them, and in addition, your Bomat Couriers are much worse if you have cards that are clogged up in your hand. So all this stuff kind of works together synergistically, to make the deck function, and it's very elegant, all things being equal.
I think so too.
It doesn't look like things should flow as well as they do, but it's very cohesive.
So I want to talk about some key cards really quick. We kind of have, or I have, and you've agreed with, the not blocking thing. So I think some of the key cards to kind of consider here are Earthshaker Kenra, Akrop Crasher, and honestly, the not blocking thing I think applies to Kari Zev too, and I'll explain why. Because so often the 2 damage gets in for free because you're forced to block Kari Zev so that you don't take the 2 damage again later. So it's like you didn't get to block another creature because you had to block Kari Zev.
Yeah, and the whole menace and and first strike thing.
Right, exactly. You're like, if I don't block Kari Zev this turn, I'm going to take 6 from her.
Yeah, it just kind of spirals on you. It's a funny deck. A lot of it is just that, like, it's hard to predict exactly how much damage you'll take, and it's hard to predict exactly how much damage.
And which line it's going to happen, right? Are they going to come out super aggressive? Are they going to grind me out with a Ramunap Ruins? Like, which direction is it going to go? And then there even more so is like, once a Soulscar Mage is in play, what are my blocks supposed to look like?
Right. I think it's just a deck that puts a lot of pressure on your opponents to play well, and in general, although the power level of each individual card isn't especially high, they all work really well together. And then, I mean, for all my talking about the card quality or whatever, Hazoret is sort of in a league of its own. Like, that card is legitimately outstanding.
So let's talk really quick about some of its key matchups. So obviously the first thing to talk about is its Temur matchup. Where do you think this deck stands against Temur? One of the Facebook threads on our Constructive Criticism Family Facebook group was kind of asking specifically about things like Harsh Mentor and Frostodon. And honestly, I was a little surprised by the conversation because to me, Harsh Mentor is a nightmare to play against when you're playing Temur.
Yeah, Harsh Mentor can be really difficult for Temur. I think that, like, the build we have up is definitely looking at those matchups. When you look at, like, multiple Rampaging Ferocodons, which are also just really good against Whirler Virtuoso, and multiple Harsh Mentor, and then the multiple Harsh Mentors between main and side, like, I'm not going to say that Temur is an easy matchup, but I think that it's a pretty tight matchup, and this deck is definitely playing the kind of cards that you need to win that matchup. That matchup traditionally has been pretty close. A lot of the teamer decks at various points were playing multiple Aethersphere Harvesters between main and side, and almost no one's doing that anymore. So my guess would be that the red decks are okay, if not outstanding there.
Yeah, and one thing is that they've really taken away some of your advantages, right? So before, your best cards in the matchup were Bristling Hydra and Whirler Virtuoso, and you're really punished now. Like, they're finding a way to punish that being your best card through Harsh Mentor and Rampaging Ferocitodon.
Yeah, and Ferocitodon, so like you'd think you probably generally have to trim Crasher a little bit if you're going to board in the extra Ferocitodons in this list. But Ferocitodon ends up doing a surprisingly good Crasher impression just in the fact that it has Menace. So, like, in a deck where your creature has Menace and then you have Shock, Abrade, Lightning Strike, it can be very difficult to produce blockers that can effectively block a Menace creature.
Yeah, I think so too. And, I think that Teamer also has a problem in that it's not good at gaining life, right? So once you get to the point where you are behind, Ramunap Ruins turns into a really, really powerful effect against you.
Yeah, that's true as well. I mean, I've certainly found this matchup to be very close in the past. And although I think the mono red players struggled a little at Worlds in that matchup, I think that as the field opens up more and you see the teamer decks gunning for the mirror a little bit more,
this will pick up. I agree.
Yeah, it's just, this is sort of the deck that reels you back into keeping your Magma Sprays in your 75, right?
So one of this deck's bad matchups is one that we can talk about really quick, which I think is tokens. I think the tokens, if there's a reason to play that deck, it's because you think that there's going to be a model of mono red around. Why is that?
Well, I think that just fundamentally the deck is pretty good at making blockers. It's good at gaining life. It has good sweepers, and it has a way to especially gain life as the game goes on. And I think that when you look at that compared to a lot of the other decks in the format, they are very good at avoiding death by Ramunap Ruins.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the fact that on turn 10...
They're turning off a huge part of your game plan.
Yes, they're just very good at mitigating that, and they're very good at sweeping away the things that stay in play for turns and turns at a time. They're also relatively good at making blockers through burn spells as the game goes on. I just... A lot of their stuff is engine-based, so basically a lot of the ways that the red deck gains advantages are through both blistering starts and then powerful top decks to deal the last few points, and the deck is good at avoiding both of those, basically. When you look at this build in particular, I think that Rampaging Ferocitodon is probably quite good in that matchup. I am not 100% sure on like the main versus side split and how much that affects its efficacy overall, but that card is not being difficult for tokens to deal with, it's very, very problematic if it stays in play.
So when you think about something like blue-black control with this deck, I know that people were saying that blue-black control had a very good aggro matchup at Worlds. I think that is to the quality of the Worlds players, not to the quality of the matchup. I think this deck has a very good blue-black control matchup.
Yeah, I would imagine that it generally does. I know that my thought was that Worlds basically kind of made a triangle of sorts, right? You had control beating Teamer and then losing to mono red, and then mono red losing to Teamer, and that was sort of the cycle. And obviously, nothing is set in stone, but the blue-black deck seems to have fallen off a little bit, and I think that one of the problems, I've talked about this a fair bit in trying to figure out decks for the Pro Tour, but the black removal spell, the second black removal spell, is very poor. Your Fatal Push is very good in this metagame, but whatever you're playing as the backup spell is quite bad.
Yeah, and Essence Scatter just doesn't do enough, right? Because
it's fine. Essence Scatter is fine. The problem that I have is more with the Vraska's Contempt and like Essence Extraction.
Well, I was going to say is that if you draw your Essence Scatter on turn whatever, right? It's like suddenly they're on the board and all of your removal spells are clunky.
Yeah, I think ultimately this is what's holding back the blue-white deck as well. But the blue-black deck not having effective ways to gain life and no effective ways to really sweep the board either just puts a lot of pressure on you to efficiently 1-for-1. And I think that's just a tough spot to be in. It's just really hard to line up spells every turn of the game and trade 1-for-1. Like, if you have a game where you get to go Fatal Push into Essence Scatter, into Censor a 3-drop, into Essence Extraction, into Scarab God, I'm sure it's great, but that's obviously just not reality most of the time.
Yeah, so kind of wrap this up, some tips and tricks for the deck. I highly recommend Aethersphere Harvester on the board. I know that some people don't play it. I think that it's really important for you to be playing that in the sideboard of Mono Red. I think that either having a 24th land in the board all the way up to maybe even a 25th land is also really important if you're not playing 24 in the main. And I think that the split of 4 Shock, 2 Abrade, 4 Lightning Strike is just correct at this point.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that at least those 10 are what you're playing, and then I've seen some people play like an 11th, but I would not go
I think it
below
depends. Yeah, it would not go below 10. And also, if you are just playing the 10, I do think the Chandra is necessary.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. That makes a lot of sense to me.
So that's it for our Deck of the Week segment. Let's go right on to our training grounds. So this week, we are going to be talking about preparing for a GP. So let's start this, man. So by the way, every week on the show we do the training grounds. It's the thing where we talk about how to get better at Magic, and this week is one that I think that I'm getting better at, and I think that Michael has been getting silver basically almost all through Grand Prix. It's something that Michael's become pretty good at, and we want to talk about it. So Michael, where do you start? So like, for example, looking at deck lists. Like, when do you start looking at deck lists for a Grand Prix?
So, I mean, it kind of depends on how much time you think you need you need to get comfortable with, like, picking a deck and sort of choosing it. I find that, like, rather than looking at specific deck lists, a lot of the time I just want to try to get a feel for what I think I will play against. So what are the big decks, like, what's hot right now? What do I think other people are going to want to play? If it's a format like Modern, I mean, what do people have access to, or Legacy stuff like that. So a lot of the time it's just trying to figure out sort of what you reasonably expect to play against, where you think the metagame is headed, what you think the other best players are going to play, and then kind of looking at lists from there, seeing if anyone's figured out anything you haven't. Making sure you're not missing anything crazy, right? You don't want to be the guy not playing the best deck when it was available to you.
Right. Exactly. Is there other research that you think that people should be doing as they start?
I think trying to have an idea of why decks are being played. So, like, not just looking at the deck lists, but trying to get at least a little bit of a feel for, like, what beats what. And that's a little bit easier in eternal formats sometimes, just because the data is, like, more constant.
Yeah.
But having a little bit of an idea of, like, okay, so why is this deck seeing a resurgence? What is it a response to? Why does the metagame look like this?
I think that on top of that, like, understanding like what their plans could reasonably be. Also, Carson Wentz is a boss. He's on this screen over here, and he just like got out of a 7-man sack and like ran for 15 yards. That was very impressive. Man, he's over here like freaking out. But like understanding the plan that other people could reasonably have, right? So like understanding like even if I'm not going to play this deck, like let's look at the last person that won a tournament with it. Did they write an article about it? What did they say that their sideboard plan was? Why did they say that they played the deck? Kind of on top of what Michael said, once you have an understanding of like why things are happening in the metagame, what are people doing reasonably with that, and what could they easily copy from somebody else?
Yeah, I think just in general trying to figure out not only what is happening, but why it's happening.
Exactly. So when do you start doing this? So like how soon do you start making these things happen for you?
It depends on the format. Like for Eternal formats, you can typically start a little bit sooner, but for rotating formats, it can be a little trickier. Like basically after the last big event that you would put stock into, prior to whatever tournament you're looking at playing. Ultimately, I don't feel like it's that important that you get started on this really early unless you like have no experience with any of the decks or think you need a ton of games to pick a deck.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that too often people start too early, and by the time that they get to the Grand Prix that they're going to, they kind of get nervous and worn out because they've done so much stuff. In fact, Michael, I remember you kind of talked about this a few months ago on the podcast. You were like, I am having a problem where I think everything is bad because I'll 5-0 3 times, and then all of a sudden I start doing poorly. The metagame's shifting too quickly. I can't make a decision. And like, I think that a lot of people run into that problem where they're like, they think they have something figured out, and then they like lose one league, and they're like, oh my gosh, people figured out what I'm doing. I don't know what to do now. Like, everything I just did is a waste.
Yeah, I think in general too, just like even beyond, what's good, that kind of stuff. Just like you put a lot of stress on yourself, and it's hard not to burn out a little bit if you're just like playing and playing and playing and playing. And ultimately, I think there's like pretty big diminishing returns on how much you get out of how much you're getting out of playing, the like second and third league every day, 3 weeks before a Grand Prix or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
at a certain point, you're just, if you're able to get better at Magic in general in that time, cool. But like, a lot of it is just, you're just going to have to make some decisions during the tournament that you probably haven't faced before. You're not going to be able to prepare yourself for every single possible matchup, every single possible situation.
And I think that it's just an unrealistic expectation that people put on themselves. And another thing to think about in that is like, if you're doing your job of hashtag always improving and constant improvement, like you're doing your job, like you're going to be prepared. You don't have to feel like you have to jam, 15 matches of Magic a day, because you are constantly improving. You are doing the things that you're supposed to do, and you're going to get rewarded for that. So don't feel like you have to like start preparing super soon for everything, because then you'll just get worn out. So let's talk.
I think that's basically it. You have to still want to play Magic when you get to the Grand Prix, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You get there and it can't be like, oh, I just have these last 15 and then I'm done for a minute. That's that's not a good.
I've done 15 matches a day for 3 weeks. I can do 15 more.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Let's talk really quick about playtesting. So, how much playtesting should you be doing?
I mean, I think you generally just want to like stay pretty sharp. I don't know that like a lot of the time, most of the playtesting I'm doing is just confirming what I would say I already know or suspect, right? So it's more like playtesting to confirm that matchups I think are going to go one way are going to go that way. But I'm more trying to pick a spot in the metagame than I am trying to like invent new decks.
Yeah, I think that pretty often for me, the amount of playtesting that I do is, is to get a feel. Like, what does this feel like? And too often I think that people try, and I've been guilty of this too, and sometimes I still wish that I was guilty of it, but it's still probably a bad habit. I'm not sure. What I'm saying is I'm not sure. But too often people are like, they want a number. They're like, what is this matchup? Is it 60-40? Is it 66-34? Like, and I think that you're putting an unrealistic expectation on yourself to actually be able to play enough matches to actually know that kind of information. And instead, what you should be doing is playing enough matchups, enough games where you understand the matchup.
Yeah, like what am I trying to do? Is it generally, is this something I really don't want to play against? Is this something I'm cool playing against? Is like, what I'm trying to do is, okay, so is this deck a good choice? Like, if I expect to play against this matchup a lot, is the deck that I have a good choice?
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that we get so focused on is the number of games played. When, in the past, that was something that I always felt like I was super important. But as I played more Magic, what I've realized is the number of games played isn't what your playtesting is about. right? Now, if I'm playtesting for a Pro Tour, yeah, I'm probably going to play X number of games in a matchup and then talk about the matchup. But like for something like a Grand Prix, I don't know that the number of games that you play is important as much as identifying what your plan is for that matchup.
Yeah, and just in general, I mean, even when it comes to like what you're really trying to do is make progress in your understanding of matchups, not in your pure repetitions, right? Like you want to know why matchups are breaking the way they are, and if it's because of like card choices you made, or if this is just the way it is fundamentally, why certain decks are better than others, you know, and how your choice stacks up. What are you trying to play against? What are you not trying to play against? This stuff I can fix through sideboarding. Is this stuff I can't really fix? Like, I think trying to just like get a number of repetitions that you're just going to be like, oh, well, now I'm super comfortable and I'm never going to be in a situation that's tough. That's just not something you can really do.
So, with that said, you know, what are the ways that you play test, Michael?
Well, sometimes I'll play, like, if I just want to see if a deck seems good or not, which is sometimes the case, where you have something and you're just like, well, this deck is kind of powerful, but is it actually good? You know, this seems like it could be good, but I haven't really played that many games with it, or this deck could be good, but I might just be bad with it. How do I get better? Playing some leagues is a really good way to do that, where I'm just like kind of trying to get a general feel for what other decks exist and how my deck plays against them. When, you know, maybe I'm interested in this deck because I'm pretty confident about one matchup, but
Sure.
this happens in like Modern a lot, where there are like 25 decks or whatever, right? And you're like, okay, so I think this deck is good against the best 2 decks. So if I can get to 5-0 or 6-0, I'm probably going to mostly have good matchups. But you need to just learn how to sequence, how to play, what your games look like. And a lot of the time it's not like really intense playtesting. It's just like trying to sort of get the idiot mistakes out. You know?
I think that the reason for what Michael just said too is the amount of so if you think about a Grand Prix in general, and I think that one of the mistakes that I've made so often in my Magic career is I treat Grand Prix the way that I would treat a Pro Tour. And like the value, like the expected value of a Grand Prix is just so much lower that the time investment that you get at a Grand Prix, like once you've invested that much time, like the it just starts to diminish so quickly. So like if you want to, like, spending a week in a house is just not a reasonable thing to do for a Grand Prix, right? Like you would just never do that because
Right.
you're spending a week of your life to maybe win, if you get extremely lucky, 10 grand, right? Like extremely lucky, and it's not even that many pro points comparatively. And it's a big investment, and too often we sit there and we jam games where we think that we're doing ourselves a huge service when maybe doing like 5 leagues on Moto would do the exact same thing and it would take you like way less time.
Yeah, I think that's true, that obviously there's just diminishing returns. I also think you got to be careful about kind of, this is especially true in formats where people don't switch decks that much, like Modern or Legacy. You got to be careful about kind of leveling yourself,
Yeah.
where like you get really excited about this deck that has a really good matchup against what you think people will play in response to the current metagame, and then it's just like, well, actually, people own Burn, so they're gonna play Burn.
So how much playtesting do we do comparatively to how much metagaming we do? So when you think about metagaming, Michael, how much does it matter to you?
Okay, so I think metagaming at like the Grand Prix level is pretty much the most important thing by far, and I spend way more time trying to choose a deck than I do actually playing the deck.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, maybe some of your choosing a deck ends up like turning into playing a deck, but I feel like I invest way more time and effort. Like I invest way more thought into choosing a deck and trying to figure out the spot that you're supposed to hit in the metagame than I do actually playing the games with the deck.
It's funny because when I think about it, I think about how that happens, And to me, a lot of it happens through playing games, and then you make a natural selection. Like if you play 5 different decks and you understand each matchup, and then you pick a deck, that your metagaming happened through playtesting.
Right, and that's true. I just usually find that I've narrowed it down so much more than that before I've ever played a game.
Okay. So a lot of theory crafting goes into that for you.
Yeah, and I think that like if you've just actually played a lot of Magic, you mostly like, if you've played with and against most of these decks before, if you've just like never played the format, obviously you're going to have to just pick a deck and try to play it at an okay level. But if you've played this format a lot and you've played most of these decks before, or you've played all the ones that you can choose to play, at least a lot of it is just going to be like, okay, so what are other people going to be playing? Okay, so if I play this, is there anything that I can put in the sideboard? If I, a lot of it is just sort of thinking about how things line up as opposed to like really playing, because the thing is that at a certain point you just know how the games are going to go already. Like if you've played most of the decks a lot and you know most of the tricks you can do with them,
you're saying exactly what I just said, right? Because you've played most of those decks a lot, you have preconceived notions going into the tournament.
Right, that you end up choosing between a couple, and maybe you'll play some games to sort of make sure you haven't missed anything.
But that happened because you're #always improving, right?
Right, that you do this before this event was
on your mind. And I think that. Oh, go ahead.
Basically, my takeaway would be that it's really, really hard to test 5 decks at the same time for any kind of, like, at any sort of a high level. So it helps to sort of have done a lot of this work in advance. Yeah. And that's harder in some formats than others.
Yeah, and I think that happens the most when you have that mindset of always improving, right? When you are playing games all the time, right? Or thinking about Magic all the time and always trying to be getting better, it becomes a lot easier to do what Michael's talking about, where you're like, well, I already have played all these decks. I know how most of these matchups sit already. Now it's about time to do the next thing that's the most important, which is having a plan. Like understanding like where my matchups break down and understanding how this will work for me makes it easier for me to select between 3 decks instead of 7 or 11.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the time that comes down to just availability. Like, you probably don't have 11 decks available to you in most formats or whatever. But even if you do, you probably have a preference for decks that you like.
Yeah. One thing that a lot of people ask us for that we don't offer very often are sideboard guides. What are your opinions on getting other people's sideboard guides and then just jamming those for a tournament?
I probably wouldn't do it for a tournament, but like sometimes if you're less familiar with a deck, it can be a good starting point. Like just having sort of a rough, like even more than like an actual sideboard guide, I sometimes just want a list of the cards that people who I respect think are bad in the match, and we can kind of build a sideboard from there. But I just want to know like what I should be looking at siding out. And some decks it's a lot easier than others. Some decks like they're pretty mid-rangey and the cards are mostly kind of replaceable, and even if you're slightly wrong, it's not a problem. But there are other decks where it's a little more rigid and you have to be careful about like interactions between potential sideboard cards or like having these in your deck at the same. I don't know. Just it helps to have an idea of generally what you're trying to do, but I also think that one of the places where actually playing a bunch has value is sort of in thinking about what sideboard cards would be effective and how you might want to leverage them in boarded games.
One of the things, kind of before we wrap this up, is I feel like a lot of players, when they're starting, don't actually give themselves a chance to do well. And this was very true of me in the old PTQ system, and very true of a lot of local players who would do this 1,000 times and then complain about it. So one of the things that we used to do is we would drive like through the night, show up at the PTQ, play the PTQ, and then like the driver would sleep on the way home and somebody else would drive. So like you'd just be driving, people would sleep, he'd sacrifice himself for the team, right? And I think that people do this in GPs way too often, where like they take a flight the morning of the Grand Prix, or they drove through the night, got there just in time. And I just want to encourage people like that you are losing so much of what you've tried to gain through all of your preparation when you do stuff like this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this comes down a lot to just like, like the stuff with like bringing water to a tournament or like some granola bars. Just like, Magic is really hard. You don't need to handicap yourself anymore, right? Like, deciding that you're going to play on 3 hours of sleep, or that you're going to get up at 3 a.m. to go catch a flight so you can, I don't know. It's just a bad time. If you can avoid that kind of stuff, I would really strongly recommend that.
Yeah, me too. Me too. All right. Well, that is it this week. Don't forget that you can support this podcast by going to patreon.com/ctmdg, become a patron of the show, starting at $1 more per month. Anything you see fit is really appreciated. You can find me on Twitter at Spencer13H. You can find me on Facebook at Spencer Stephen Howland. You can find me in the Constructive Critics Facebook group. You can like this podcast on Facebook, Constructive Criticism. You can subscribe on YouTube. Hit that follow button here on Twitch. Everything is really appreciated. Don't forget to check out our sponsors. Michael, where can people find you?
You can find me on Facebook. My name is Michael Handrocker. You can also find me on Twitter at MagicMikeMTG.
You can join the conversation through our Facebook group. That's a Constructive Criticism family. If you're a patron of $5 or more, you get access to the Constructive Critics group. You can join the Discord channel. All of those links are on the bios page at constructivecriticism.com. You can join the clan by messaging me at Spencer13Deb on MTGO. And you can tweet at us with hashtag would that be good. Hashtag would that be good is our Twitter outreach program. If you tweet it, we'll read it. And yeah, it's time for the hashtag would that be good segment. So let's start with
Casey's limited deck.
So I think this is sealed.
Yes, it looks like sealed.
And the deck looks insane.
Kind of. I mean, it looks both possibly good and potentially questionable choices.
Yeah, I would have to look at this for a lot longer to give an opinion, but you look like you have enough red and green cards that you should have been playing red-green, because that's
It's playing Vona, which is pretty stupid.
Yeah, but he has like literally every... If I'm seeing this correctly, oh no, that's a Demolish. That's not good. But he has Thrash of Raptors, Ripjar Raptor, Snapping Sailback, Colossal Dreadmaw, Sun whatever. He's got a Sure Strike, which is like the best combat trick. He's got a Pounce. Oh, he doesn't have the 2-drops.
Yeah, the 2-drops look pretty bad. Anyways, the only real thing I want to call out here is playing double Cobbled Wings, because I can tell you that almost no matter what your other choices were, it shouldn't have been double Cobbled Wings.
Idea: call pizza places near me until I find one that won't serve pineapple pizza, and then only get pizza from there. Hashtag would that be good? It's a lot of investment.
Protecting yourself from yourself?
Yeah. Just don't order pineapple on pizza, and then you're like a good person and stuff.
Easy.
Finished 8-3 in Legacy at Eternal Weekend, playing Leovold Elves with New Veraska in the sideboard at Spencer13H. Hashtag would be good. I do like New Veraska. I'm interested to see what kind of changes happen from Planeswalkers seeing more play-in elves, because I do think that the deck can grind out really well. So if you can find the right combination of grindy cards, I think that it could be really powerful.
Oh, it's an interesting one. I don't know that is New Vraska good?
I've been impressed with it, but I don't know that I would be impressed with it in Legacy. It's
yeah.
It's a 3-turn clock.
I mean, pretty much every Planeswalker's a 3-turn clock, right? Like,
yeah, but not like definitively. I don't know.
Yeah, but if you pay 6 mana for something, like, I don't know, it's a lot. It's a lot. I don't know. I don't know about 6-drops.
Bad A Bolus Horns Pumpkin Carving. Not a bad way to spend the day off with the family. Hashtag would that be good? Followed up by Mason calling him out saying looks meh LOL. Hashtag Bolas. And then fake news. I don't know what this means. I don't know if that Andrew said that it was meh or if Mason's just being rude.
Andrew said it was mediocre.
Okay. Can
Oh,
people
so you're
hear
saying
you, Mason?
so what you're saying, Mason, is that it actually looks great.
I don't know what Mason's
The
trying to
fake
say
news
here.
is that it looks
All right,
mediocre.
now they can hear me. I had to turn it on
I
so I could
think-
explain this. He posted on Facebook saying meh bolas horns, and I saw that and thought, yeah, they're pretty meh. And then I looked up hashtag would that be good, and he said they were bad A bolas horns. So I just want to know what the truth is.
I think you're being a cyberbully, is what I think is happening.
You're not wrong. Hashtag Melania Trump.
Oh,
Bring it.
we also
And
missed Adrian tweeted Flashback Friday that weekend I won a PPTQ playing Team Marvel without Rogue Refiners. Hashtag would that be good. I mean, it sounds bad, but it clearly was good because you won. So,
Yeah, there we go.
take it.
Having to figure out my first Twitch emote is so hard. I don't know if I want Baboon Larry David or a lot of energy. What did you pick? Mason?
So I'm back. I had to put it on so they can hear me. That was for me. That was my tweet, and I have not picked yet. I'm still trying to figure out. I think it's going to be a baboon, but I just don't know. It's a hard.
Oh, did you forget a comma?
Yeah, well, there was enough space, so I had to cut a comma and hope you'd figure it out. But
Well, obviously I didn't
a lot
because
to
I
ask.
speak English. Yeah.
yeah, well, that's not my fault, is it?
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Cyberbully Mason, what did you learn this week?
I learned that every time you go to mute everything, Spencer's going to call on you, and then you have to talk again.
Powerful.
Yep, that's what I learned. Also, Spencer can really hurt you sometimes if he says the right stuff.
Michael, what
Keeps
did you?
calling you a cyberbully relentlessly.
No, just he's like, you'll be a good person if you don't eat pizza. And it's like that's really harsh.
Oh.
Yeah, you can cut deep.
Maybe you should.
People
order
at my locals bring up
pizza.
pineapple pizza. I was playing in the modern tournament on Sunday, and someone came up behind me, and someone had bought a pineapple pizza and said, "quote Yeah, only good people. Only bad guys would eat pineapple pizza." And then he stared at me.
Hey,
Whoa.
It's affecting my life now.
I'm just saying that you sound a lot like Austin Godels right now, and I'm not gonna put up with two Austin Godels in my life.
Does Austin also like pineapple on pizza?
No, but he's always accusing me of affecting his life with my podcast.
Oh.
I feel like me and Austin Godels have more and more alike as time goes on. And at one point, you thought we were the same person.
I did.
Yeah,
I
you're
did.
gonna convince him to play Sacred Cat once, and then it'll all be over.
Oh, if he ever casts the Sacred Cat, I'll know. I'll know that they're the same person.
I'm not even pro. Sacred
Also,
Cat, so.
you didn't come to my party because you could, whatever. When in fact you're just Austin, and you don't exist. You don't exist.
The truth's out there, and I gotta run now. Deuces.
Michael, what'd you learn this week?
I don't know. I feel like my brain just got melted by that whole sequence. I learned that I think the red deck is pretty good. After talking about it a little, I'm tempted to give that one another try.
I always feel that way.
just
Every time I
reasonable.
talk about mono red, I always feel that way. I learned about a new deck called Thieves, apparently. And that's it for this week, everybody. We'll see you guys next week.
Yeah.